All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Frank Analysis. I am your host, Franco, and I am joined today by Kim Iversen, who is an independent journalist, formerly from The Hill. But prior to that, and still to this day, she has her own channel called Kim Iversen. She recently left The Hill after she was excluded from an interview, which would have made a lot of sense if she was there, considering all the work that she's done ever since 2020 covering COVID 19. She's been challenging the narrative.
You
I
know,
know it's been really, yeah.
Franco, it's frozen. I can't hear you.
Oh, uh, guys, let me know if you guys can hear me. Testing, testing, testing.
All right, I can't hear you. I'm trying. Okay, I think I got you back. Sorry, I've lost connection a little bit. I had the same problem yesterday with StreamYard.
Oh, man. Can you hear
Yeah,
me
so I
now?
I can hear you now. Yeah, but I did have the same problem when I was using StreamYard yesterday in like specifically. So I don't know if it's an issue they're having on their end. We should take it up with them.
Yeah, we should take it up with them. Yeah,
Yeah.
but as long as everything's good now,
I can now hear
we
you.
good.
Yeah, but you were a bit choppy for me, but I've got you now.
All right. Yeah, sorry about that. But yeah, you've been covering the COVID narrative ever since 2020, back when it was a lot more lonely to challenge that narrative. So it would have made a lot of sense to have had you in that interview. And I'm pretty sure they were very conscious about excluding you from that interview over at the Hill. So
Oh yeah,
was
yeah.
this the last straw? Was there like a series of negative events that was occurring at the Hill? Or was this just a single negative event that occurred after an otherwise overall positive experience at the Hill? What exactly happened there?
I mean, my overall positive experience was positive. There were definitely some things that were not as positive that, I wouldn't say this was necessarily a last straw, but it certainly was, I would say, a red line. I've
Yeah.
got my own red line in the sand. And this was definitely the red line. And they knew that this was, at least I thought they knew. I thought I had made very, very clear when I joined the show that this was a red line that, and, I mean, I had made it very clear on numerous occasions to my audience that I was not being censored, held back, or limited. When I joined the Hill, I had been independent, obviously, for a couple of years prior to that point. And then when I started appearing on the Hill, everyone was very worried that I was being swallowed up by corporate media and that I would have to, that I would change, that my viewpoints would change. Um, or that they would be censoring me, and people questioned how I could tolerate that. And I assured everybody that that wasn't happening, that I was not being held back, that I was not being limited, that I was not being censored, that I, that I, and then I wouldn't appear in certain segments and people would think, oh, Kim's being excluded. And in those situations, I wasn't at all. I was just, uh, you know, I wasn't on the show at that time or something. So, but in this particular instance, it was a deliberate exclusion. It was a very different situation than what I had when I wasn't in a segment previously. And I had made it clear to them the day before in a phone call that it wouldn't fly. It wouldn't fly with me or the audience to exclude me from that interview. That everybody would know. I mean, it would be obvious to the audience right away that if I wasn't in that interview, that I had been cut out of that interview, and that the audience would not tolerate it. And they
Right.
seemed to understand that. And then the next day, the next morning, when the interview was actually to happen, they called anyway and they said, we've decided we're still moving forward without you in this interview. Um, they ultimately, they said to me, the executive producer told me that she had spoken to management and the editor in chief or whoever, a variety of people above her, and that they all had come to the consensus essentially that to move forward with the interview without me involved. And now I got a different story from upper management when I spoke to them later that day, and I told them the seriousness of what had happened and how that was. I mean, I had already expressed it to them previously, but they gave me a different story, and they told me that no, it was the executive producer who made ultimately the editorial decision, that they did not make that editorial decision. It was her exclusively. And um, so, but at the end of the day, it put me in a position that, I had promised the audience for a year that I was not being censored or held back, and that I would not be a part as somebody who was coming from independent media. I was not going to join corporate media if they were going to censor me or limit me or hold me back like that.
Yeah.
And then when they did, I didn't really feel like, I mean, what was I supposed to say to the audience after that?
Right.
Not only that, but it was such a slap in the face for all of the view. Not only was it a form of censorship, right? Holding me back from that interview and telling me I could not take part in it, but it was also a slap in my face. I mean, on a personal level, it was a slap in my face. It was, here I had been bringing them millions of views, and then I tell them, look, the audience is not going to like this. You'd think that they would listen to me when I say the audience isn't going to like this, since I'm the one who seemed to know what the audience liked,
Yeah.
since I'm the one that was like bringing the audience. And for them to just disregard that and to exclude me out of that interview was it was a slap in my face as well as a slap in the viewers' faces that I had brought to the show. And so I didn't feel like I could stick around, and I told them, I said, you guys have put me now in an impossible position, because what am I supposed to say to the audience? When they say, Kim, are you being censored? And am I supposed to say no? I mean, I could say that prior to this point, but I can't say it now.
Yeah. It would be a disservice, and you'd be lying to the audience. So
I'd be lying, and I can't be a liar, because the only thing you've got in this industry is, as news, and the way news should be, is we've got trust. The audience's trust is the only thing we have, and when you lose the trust of the audience, you become CNN plus. I mean, you're
yeah.
just going
And
to the graveyard.
that didn't last long either. CNN Plus, it couldn't even last like a month or
10
a
days
little bit more
is
of
all
that.
I got.
Jeez.
Yeah.
But we appreciate you maintaining your integrity, and I'm sure a lot of the audience that you have still trusts you because of that. So we really appreciate you for doing that. And while you were there, you prevented the Hill from being an echo chamber. You definitely helped raise awareness. And you did pick up an audience from there also. So there are positives to joining corporate media, but I think that eventually whoever joins corporate media will reach the point in which an event such as what occurred to you will happen. But
Yeah, and right, exactly. I mean, I'm definitely grateful for the time that I was there. It certainly helped me build. I mean, there's no doubt about it. It was a really good thing. I definitely don't regret any of it.
yeah,
I mean, there's certainly aspects of it that, I never felt like I was treated that well. And that was one of my big beefs. And it wasn't the company, it wasn't even the corporation that did that. It was and I'm not even 100% certain who was making the decisions that really that made me feel constantly like a second class citizen on that show. Surprisingly, I mean, even though, yeah, my face was put front and center, on the logos, they started putting my face on everything because they had consultants telling them, Kim's your star, so you got to put her
mhm,
everywhere, right? But even with all of that, they never offered me the contract to be on Rising full time. Like when Crystal and Sagar left, they obviously they were looking for replacements for Crystal and Sagar, right? I mean, they were hoping to have like a male female duo, and they had actually locked down, Robbie has been in a contract for a long time, and he's a set cast member of Rising. He's not going anywhere. He's in well, I mean, I guess companies can always do whatever they want, but he has, an actual long-term deal to be on Rising as a chair. And they were trying to figure out what they were going to do with the Crystal slot, essentially, like the more left or liberal spot. And they never once offered me that job. Never once. Like, I was never in consideration for whatever reason for that slot, even though I was bringing them millions of views. And the producer kept advocating for myself and for Ryan. She, for whatever reason, didn't like me by myself with just, myself when Robbie. She didn't like Robbie. I mean, she wanted me with somebody else and Robbie because for whatever reason, maybe I think she may, I don't know, but there was never considering me for that slot is odd. I think anybody would be surprised to find that out, that I was never offered that job. And not only that, but I was the lowest paid of the hosts that they had,
Jeez.
of the main host. I was the lowest paid. When I confronted them about being the lowest paid, they everybody else was in a contract, by the way. They never gave me a contract. I was the only one. They've given a contract to everybody. Robbie, Brianna, Ryan, Graham, everybody's gotten a contract. They've never given me a contract. They never offered me that job. And then on top of it, I was the lowest paid. When I confronted them about being the lowest paid, I ended up, they came back and cut my hours instead of bumping my pay up to be at least equal to Ryan Grimm's. So I was paid like 40% less than Ryan Grimm. And when I found that out, I of course was upset because I was getting much bigger numbers and bringing them in much more revenue. And they, rather than reconcile it by making my pay equal, they instead cut me to part. That's why I was not on the whole show, and that's the real reason why I wasn't on the whole show. I kind of said, well, I get to sleep in. I'm in LA, so I don't want to be up that early in the morning. And that was part of it, but that was definitely not the reason. I mean, the reason was they just said, well, how about you just do part-time? And that way we can, pay you less, I suppose. So yeah, there were some other issues that basically came to, that definitely gave me a bad taste in my mouth, I would say, being there. And things that I felt were, yeah, slaps in the face. And then I guess being left out of the Fauci interview, I think was the final slap in the face. And that, I don't know how much management obviously needed to get more involved. The show was kind of running very independently. The corporation that purchased it during the time that I was there was not, hands-on during the time, so I was kind of left, the management team, the producers were the ones kind of running the show, and I would assume they were the ones making these decisions of, not offering me the job, not bumping my pay up to where it should have been equal to at least my co-hosts, at least giving me some sort of a contract like they did to practically everybody else. It was, so yeah, but then, at the same time, they got a consultant saying, Kim's your main person, put her all over the place. It didn't make any sense to me. I don't think it makes sense to anybody.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like there's a lot of people that that really don't know what they're doing,
I think
and
that's
they
what it
really
was.
took you for granted, and they really missed out because I think that that interview that you could have had with Anthony Fauci would have been a viral one because all the other ones are just him saying the same thing that he says on other mainstream media platforms, and the only person that we really see challenging him is like Rand Paul,
Right,
which
exactly.
to me seems like it may be political theater, but who else you got out there challenging Anthony Fauci? But I wanted to play this clip here of how the interview went, and it shows Dr. Fauci contradicting himself. And I want to ask you what you would have done in that situation, what follow-up questions you would have asked. So here is from that interview on the Hill, and let me
Yeah,
know if you can hear that. Can you hear that?
a little bit, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure you would have come really well prepared to challenge the things that he would have said. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think my big question to Fauci would have been at that point, well, then what was your job exactly? during this
Yeah.
pandemic. I mean, obviously, you're not able to shut things down on your own. You're not able to actually, in your position, make directives, but you certainly make recommendations. Otherwise, what was your job this whole time? So if you weren't making recommendations like you're claiming, then what were you doing?
Yeah.
Because that seems like that's what your job was. I mean, somebody he's, then we'd have to ask him to clarify what his role was during the pandemic, and he would then have to admit it was making recommendations, right? Like, because he's sitting there
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, I don't make recommendations. That's the CDC." Well, what do you do then? I'm pretty sure it's make recommendations. In fact, that's what you were doing the entire time you were standing up every day with Donald Trump and Dr. Deborah Birx, right? It was making recommendations. So to now claim, "Oh no, it wasn't me, it was the CDC." But that's how he is. I mean, he just likes to deflect. He thinks that, he can do no wrong, and so he makes excuses for his flip-flopping, or he deflects and places the blame on somebody else. And that's been par for the course this entire time. But honestly, at that point, I think what we need to know from him going forward is, does he still advocate for lockdowns? What about vaccine mandates? We still have vaccine mandates in this country right now. Why doesn't he make a recommendation to end the vaccine mandate for European travelers, foreign travelers coming into the country that are unvaccinated? We can travel to Europe as unvaccinated, but unvaccinated Europeans cannot travel to the United States. Why is that? Why won't he make a recommendation to change that? What about school children? What about the fact that Paxlovid has never been tested on people who've been vaccinated, yet it's been used, and Fauci himself has had a rebound case of this? Are we following the science, or are we not? If we're just able to take medicines that haven't been tested, there's no clinical evidence of it being effective in those particular situations. Paxlovid was shown to be effective, but the only people in those clinical trials were unvaccinated high-risk adults. They didn't try it out on vaccinated high-risk adults. Now we're seeing all these rebound cases. So why is he okay with being okay using Paxlovid and recommending Paxlovid for people who it was never tested for, yet other medicines were demonized and dragged through the mud as being, dewormers? So there's a lot of discrepancy, a lot of inconsistency with Fauci, and certainly that needs to be brought up to him. But he's so slippery.
Yeah.
He's able to just, you're never going to get a real answer out of Anthony Fauci. So I wouldn't have expected to get answers. What I would have gotten out of him was a Rand Paul moment, right? Where he says, "Well, he would have been like, you're an anti-vaxxer."
Right. Yeah, like a straw man. Like not even answering the question or anything, just going directly towards attacking the character.
Right.
And I mean, again, who else is going to be challenging this guy? Like we have to be questioning what authority is telling us to do. Otherwise, we're not actually following the science. And I came across an article sometime last year showing how people who are skeptical of the narrative are actually practicing science more than people who are just obediently following what the media is telling them, because that is part of the process. You have to question whether this is the way a certain process actually works. Like you have to test it out. But I mean, we can talk about so many different things that Dr. Fauci said that we had to do that just made absolutely no sense, from the mask to injecting ourselves over and over again when the variants have already evolved. And I mean, you've been covering this again, for years. So we deserve answers to this stuff.
I mean, we're never going to get them out of Fauci. There's no doubt about that. I mean, I don't think any of us could expect if he sits in front of congressional hearings and still they can't, if Rand Paul, a sitting senator, cannot get answers when he's brought Fauci in to be questioned in front of the United States government, we're not getting answers out of Fauci. Nobody is. So, but the thing is at least pressing him on the hypocrisy, or at least pressing him on these questions that he really should be answering. And if he comes back and says, "Well, I've seen what you do, and you're an anti-vaxxer, and I don't want to answer questions from an anti-vaxxer or something," and he strawmans and attacks, that's what Americans need to see, actually, because that is the stuff that changes the minds of people, where they say, "Wow, this guy I thought I was trusting of this guy. I thought he was going to be the guy to lead us through this. And now this is how he's been over and over and over again. It chips away. And finally, more and more people look and say, forget this. This guy, I'm not listening to him. He's all about himself. And so that's the only thing it really does. But I should have had the opportunity and the ability to do that, to further expose him.
Yeah, which would really expose him, which is the whole purpose of an interview, is to see, well, it's not the whole purpose, but when you interview somebody, you really see whether someone is genuine or not.
Right.
They expose themselves. If they get emotional and then they strawman and they attack you, then they look less trustworthy when they do that.
Yeah.
I've had experiences like that on this show when I interview with people and they get emotional and mad at me for just simply asking questions, like in a calm way. Then it's because they're probably trying to hide something or they're getting mad that they're getting exposed. But Fauci, with everything that's been going on, he either is being incompetent or he's lying. Either way, I don't think that he should be in the position that he's in now. But unfortunately, it looks like
Yeah.
he's going to peacefully retire, which is unfortunate.
He will peacefully retire, but look, his legacy is ruined. I mean, he might not realize that there's certainly a faction of people who still adore him and think he's the greatest thing of all time. And he certainly loves to have that sort of adoration. He's clearly shown himself to be very narcissistic. He's had many instances, I think, of appearing very narcissistic to where it's like, okay, I am the science. Or the other day when he said it's called the Fauci effect,
Yeah.
he's like, it's the Fauci effect when people want to go into science because they see me and I'm the scientist, right? So, um, but yeah, I do think though that the majority of people, especially as time goes on and we're living with COVID and more people get COVID and they, after having done everything they were supposed to do, and they see the effects, especially when the real long-term effects of the lockdowns, of people losing their jobs, of all of us being forced to just buy from Amazon basically, and mom and pop shops got shut down. When we start to see the real effects of what those policies had on the economy, being not Wall Street. A lot of people were getting that wrong in the beginning of the pandemic, saying that the economy is Wall Street. And if you're not for shutting down, then you are for Wall Street, not realizing that an economy has nothing to do with Wall Street. An economy is what drives what makes everything go round every day. It's not investments on NASDAQ. It's the dry cleaner that you go to and the nail salon and the restaurant and the Uber drivers. And, it's what make the grocery workers. That's the economy.
Yeah.
And, I think as people see the real effects of what those policies had, and how it was ineffective, completely ineffective. Nothing worked. There was nothing that was going to stop an airborne virus. That's just the bottom line. I think his legacy is ruined. I mean, more people will just be like, "Oh yeah, he was that." We followed Fauci and we followed him into destruction. Basically, we self-destructed over it in a lot of ways.
He will not be looked at kindly in history.
History won't. Yeah.
There's going to be books published about how horrible that whole situation was back in 2020, and we were doing all these things and then they were gaslighting us, telling us that we're following the science, even though people weren't actually looking at the science, and the censorship. It's not going to be good. And I'm seeing people in my everyday life now who received 2 shots, and they're saying, "Yeah, I didn't get the booster. It made no sense to me because." I still got COVID. Some people got COVID 2 or 3 times despite getting the injections. We got our president, Joe Biden, who, despite having 4 injections supposedly, he still got sick. He got the rebounds. And then I saw you covering this, saying they were coming out saying that, oh, it's because it's working. That's why he got sick again. It's just bending over backwards to just make the public think that this is still working. But yeah, what have you come across in regards to like Paxlovid and Pfizer? What has your research told you about that?
Well, I mean, with Paxlovid, we just still don't know a lot about it. When, like I mentioned, when it was being studied, the clinical studies, They tested it on high risk individuals who had been unvaccinated, and they found that it was effective in preventing hospitalizations. I'd have to even go deeper into those studies, but it did seem to be effective. But a lot of the studies that were conducted by Pfizer prior to rolling out not just the COVID stuff, but I mean just Pfizer products in general. This is what big pharma does. They release their studies and it's like, look at how effective our product is. And then, of course, it comes to market. And when it's actually in real world practice, we find it's not as effective as you claimed, right? And that's what we saw with the vaccines, for example. They said it's not, it starts off with 99% effective. If you get this vaccine, you will not get COVID. Or then they were like, okay, well, if you get COVID, you will not feel it. You won't be sick. You're not going to miss
Right.
those days of work, right? And then when people were like, I got the shots and I'm still sick like a dog, right? I got the flu, I'm down for days. And then they're like, well, at least you didn't go to the hospital, and
Right.
then, well, you didn't die. And then it was like, well, you died. Well, then you needed that. Well, you should have taken 4 shots, like obviously it keeps changing and shifting. And that's because when they conduct these studies originally and they tell us, oh, yeah, it's super effective, they don't really know until they roll that thing out in the public and then people start taking it. And what we found with Paxlovid is an extremely high rate of rebound. And the thing is, they don't know why. They sit there and they say, I mean, the scientists are saying, we don't know why. Maybe it's people are taking it too soon. Maybe people aren't taking enough. Maybe it's working so well that your body doesn't build antibodies fast enough, and then you catch COVID again suddenly, which is like outrageous to think that as you've been isolated for 5 days, that you suddenly catch COVID again is the minute you step foot outside. Like, so that's going on over and over and over again. So what we know is that they don't know. We also know that Paxlovid is a combo drug. It's made out of 2 or 3 different drugs, one of them being an HIV medication. And that now, as we know, HIV doesn't get cured, right? It just gets suppressed.
Mm.
So it suppresses into your system and it doesn't go away. It suppresses to the point where if you were to test for HIV, they wouldn't be able to detect the virus. So that sounds a lot like what's going on with Paxlovid. And here we are. We know it's a combo drug that includes an HIV drug. So perhaps there needs to be some looking into. And in fact, if I had HIV, I would be demanding that they actually start looking at that particular drug, because the drug that's mixed into Paxlovid, that's also in the HIV compound that they use, that drug doesn't actually go after the virus. It's meant to have some sort of enhancement effect. So I'd be wondering, if I had HIV, is that whatever that compound is, that drug, if they put that in for COVID and it did the same thing where it just suppresses the virus, and then when you stop taking it, the virus comes back. If it's going on with COVID and it's happening with HIV, what if you didn't use that particular drug in the formula? Would we maybe cure HIV? I mean, it's just like a question I would be having. Of course, I would think the scientists would have know those answers. I would suspect and hope they'd already tested it and they'd be like, no, Kim, it's, we tried that. It didn't work. And, but I'd be asking the question.
Yeah. And that's the healthy thing to do, especially considering all the lawsuits that Pfizer has. The violation tracker that I have up here shows all the different offenses that Pfizer has had. And that's just Pfizer. There's also AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, all of which were given emergency use authorization to produce vaccines. I mean, wouldn't you say it's fair for people to have a choice on whether they want to receive certain treatments or vaccines, especially considering the history of these corporations?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for whatever reason, everybody just forgot during the pandemic. Like, as
Yeah.
soon as the pandemic hit, everybody was like, oh, who cares about their terrible track record of the past? Like, who cares? They're benevolent now. Everything's good. There's nothing going on here.
What do you think the reason for that is, that people would turn off their minds for that When it comes to foreign policy, a lot of people on the left are like always questioning the military industrial complex and what government authorities say. But for this, for some reason, they just trusted the people that claim to be following the science. Is it
Well,
just because they don't understand what the science is?
no, I think it was just fear. I mean, fear
Oh,
makes everybody's brain go turn to mush, you know. I think, and we do see this on the left a bit with foreign policy. There are certain people on the left that maintain their thinking on foreign policy. Plenty of people, in fact, and a lot of those same people that can question every foreign policy narrative. A lot of those people actually fell for the COVID, you know, or they fell for the big pharma stuff. They're like, oh no, we trust big pharma after spending years of their time in independent media calling for big pharma to be held accountable because they knew, you know, they were calling out big pharma on a regular basis,
right,
saying that they were the reason why we were having high drug prices, that they were in it for the profit. I mean, they knew this. They were saying that ad nauseum. In fact, they were the group saying it over and over and over again, the prominent group saying it. And then suddenly the pandemic hits and their brains turned to mush and they were like, oh no, no, but they're going to help us now. This is the one time that these big pharma, you know, they're here to rescue us. And so that was really interesting. It just goes to show the effect a virus has on people. You know, there is something inherently scary about a virus to people. And it triggers, I think, for many people, emotions of like becoming a zombie. You know, they're like, oh my gosh, if I get the virus, it's going to be like zombie land or something.
right.
And it just triggers a type of fear that maybe for them, they don't have when it comes to foreign policy. You know, some people, they hear terrorist is coming to get you and they immediately go, oh my gosh, we have to do everything we have to do, like carpet bomb them,
Right.
eradicate them, more guns, more war, right? And some of us look at it and say, oh my gosh, no, that's just going to that's going to make the problem worse. So some people's brain, I think what triggers the fear, and everybody seems to have a different fear trigger.
Yeah. Yeah, I think they think, oh, like it's a virus. Like the virus doesn't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican or whether you're in China or Russia or whatever. It doesn't care about foreign policy. A virus would be indiscriminate. So then they're like, oh, I don't understand like how to stop this stuff. So I'm just gonna sit back and trust these people who probably do know. They've gone to college, they've gone to medical school, they have their PhD. So I'm just gonna sit back and let them tell me what I should do. I Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think fear just really blinded people, and they
Yeah.
honestly just lost their minds. And you know, it would be interesting to do a study on what it is that each group, you know, certain mind types, what are they afraid of? What triggers the most amount of fear? And for, I think, you know, it kind of makes sense when you think about it with the left that has been calling for Medicare for all, calling for, you know, big pharma to be held accountable. You know, that has been the main focus of certain groups, right? They really focus on healthcare. And yet it was that same group that focuses on healthcare that actually was extremely afraid of the virus. Isn't that interesting?
Right.
So they're focused on medical, they're focused on healthcare, and they were the most afraid of the virus. And the people, you know, like conservatives, Republicans seemed less afraid of the virus, but they're also the people that are less likely to want to give Medicare for all, right? They're like, well, to each their own kind of a thing when it comes to medical. So they clearly don't have a fear of even themselves, like, let's say, getting cancer and having massive medical bills. It's not top of their mind. They just think, you know, you know, you do you and I'll do me and whatever. If that happens, oh, well, bad luck. And that's so it's interesting that the mentality of even just when you look at the people that support the policy or who aren't for a certain policy and how that translates into their real world fear levels. You know, that's interesting. And I think maybe the same thing when it comes to maybe when we look at foreign policy and war and terror, you know, it's the same group that is, I'm sure, like if we look at those that call for an eradication of terrorists and carpet bomb them and, you know, just completely do whatever it takes, might be the ones that are the most afraid if there was some sort of terrorist type event or something that seemed to be. And we do see that. We see that in the news media We see oftentimes the people that tend to be more for warmongering and more for, blow everything up, if, blow up the bad guy, tends to be the same group that is constantly seeming, when you talk to them, they're always like, oh, but the terrorists, or there's going to be,
Right.
there's going to be maybe a terrorist attack. Like, so it's interesting the mentality and what people are afraid of and how that directly links to the policies they support.
That's a really interesting take, and that makes a lot of sense. Like now you're sitting here and explaining that, that makes a lot of sense. I never thought about that. Um, they they also didn't like go into like looking at it for themselves and being like, all right, what information is being kept away from me? Like, people when it comes to foreign policy, they go in and look and they look for certain information about what exactly is being kept from me. What is the mainstream media not telling me? They kind of know which sources to look at for. But when it comes to this, like new zoonotic disease, like they probably didn't know exactly where to look, and it became an echo chamber. Like even a lot of the leftist sources were repeating a lot of the things that the mainstream media was saying. They fell for, and you covered this about the animal trials and how that was skipped in a lot of cases, or they were done at the same time as when
Right.
they were being
Yeah.
distributed to the
Yeah.
people.
Technically they weren't skipped, right?
Right.
That's what the fact checker said. They were like, no, they didn't skip animal trials. They just did them at the same time they gave it to humans.
Right.
And
So
it's
what?
like, okay, well, normally we think of an animal trial and we think that's done before you give it to the humans because you want to see what it may or may not do to the animals. And so if you just went straight to the humans and the animals at the same time, then you kind of effectively skipped animal trials.
Right. So what studies have you come across or articles have you come across in regards to that? How did they deceive the public into thinking that this is safe, after they skipped the trials? Well, I mean, technically skipped or done congruently. What
Right.
have you come across?
Well, their reasoning for it was they said that, they had been testing mRNA technology for years, for decades even, but the technology, the mechanism of doing it, that's like saying, I've tested like when syringe needles first came out, let's say back in the day when that was first developed. And it's like, well, we know needles are safe and effective. It's fine. And then it's like, yeah, but what did you put in the syringe? Well, blah,
Yeah.
blah, 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 yeah. It's like, oh, uh, and it's like, well, that might have something to do with how effective and safe it is once you administer, the needle is just the mechanism for putting it into my system. That's not the actual product, that you're pumping in. And the same with
Mm-hmm.
mRNA, when they go back and they say, well, we tested it for decades and it's safe and effective. And it's like mRNA is a mechanism, it's a delivery mechanism like a needle. That's all it is. So it depends on what you've now trained the mRNA, what message you've sent to my RNA. Like that matters. Like if the message, so you can't say it's safe, blanket safety, right? But they still did that. That is exactly what they did. And they just said, so we know it's fine, it's safe and effective. And we're able to now move forward and give this to a bunch of human test subjects. But even when you look at the human test subjects, because they did do animal testing and human testing at the same time. So this was still in the early phases. This had not been rolled out to the public just yet. It was, being rolled out to thousands of early people in these clinical trials, essentially. But then when you look at who they gave it to in the clinical trials, the way they sorted out the patients, they basically eliminated high risk patients and then said, look at the outcome. It's so great. They sorted, and that's what happens when a pharmaceutical company gets to run their own trial, is they can manipulate it to make sure the outcome is in their favor. I mean, how many times do we hear from pharma when they're getting to this point that they're like, well, we finally did do those clinical tests on people and it didn't work. Like we hardly
Right.
ever hear that. It works. It always works. It's like it's a miracle. It always works.
They're gonna do everything they can to maximize the profits, so they have to maintain that trust with people. And they take advantage of how people just don't understand and don't read the scientific literature, and how people don't understand that certain studies receive more funding based off of what's going to make that corporation more money.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, they definitely have been riding on public faith, public good trust in them, people believing the science, people thinking scientists are benevolent. They're just scientists. They're not out to make bunches of money. They're not out to, they're just scientists in a lab, and that's what they do. And I think many of us have believed that growing up. We really had those kind of images and those thoughts about clinical studies and scientists, and that they're neutral. They're totally neutral. They're just doing the science. And what we learned during this pandemic, I think the biggest exposure of the pandemic, not only of our government that has a real strong authoritarian streak, particularly on the Democratic side at this point in history, that's not always been the case. Massive authoritarian side came out on the right for a long time, the Christian right
Mm-hmm.
especially, controlling everybody with their morality. And now we're seeing that on the left controlling everybody with their morality. And I think the big thing that was also exposed was the fact that science is bought. And so many of us realized that when we started researching and hearing more about how much funding, for example, Bill Gates does for all of these various different medical institutions. And we all know if you just follow the money, that's where you're going to get, you're going to find out what the truth is when you follow the money. And when you see that there's this disproportionate influence coming from Bill Gates, who has his own personal, agenda of whether it be for money making reasons or power control reasons, or maybe it's just his genuine feelings. There's people that genuinely just have certain convictions, and he just really believes it and he wants everybody to do it, the things that he
Right.
wants. And so he's able to fund it. Just looking at where the money comes from, looking how science is unfortunately bought off, much like our government. I think that was a big, huge exposure during the pandemic.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I want to ask you one more sort of off topic question, but it has to do with how we get out of this mess, if that's all right.
So how do we get out of this? Is that the
Yeah,
question?
yeah.
Oh
No, no,
boy, if I
it's
knew.
related to that. Yeah.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
I don't think that third party like Movement for a People's Party is going to be the solution to this mess. I think that the solution is to opt out, spread awareness, so have more people presenting information that you otherwise won't see on mainstream news. So things that you're already doing and that other independent media content creators are doing, and journalists. But what is the difference in your perspective? Because I know you support the Forward Party. What is the difference with the Forward Party to MPP for why you came to supporting the Forward Party?
Well, because the Forward Party, so I think there's like a messaging issue going on with the Forward Party. I don't really view it. Yes, it is a party. It's technically a party. It is trying to get ballot access in certain areas. It is going to run candidates, but it's really more like a caucus and a party blend. So it's a coalition, I would say, of people coming from a bunch of different political parties. You don't actually have to give up your political party to be a
Mm,
member of the Forward Party. You can be both. So I know that's hard for people to understand because we're so used to traditional political parties where it's like, I'm a Republican or I'm Green or I'm People's Party or I'm, whatever it is, right? And Forward Party is more of a coalition where it's you don't have to give up your primary party. What the Forward Party's aim is to help change ballot access laws throughout the country. So ballot access is a big deal. In fact, I just did a segment today talking to Larry Sharp, who is the Libertarian candidate for governor in New York. He has been left off the ballot because New York changed the rules, and they have now no third party candidates essentially on their ballot this coming election. They were able to just like kind of jimmy rig the whole thing to make it to where it's only two people and there's no real third party option for people. That type of ballot access needs to be challenged. And in a state like New York or states that are, California, run by one party, or even on the red side, run by one party states, it's very difficult because they don't, there's no incentive for people in their state legislatures to vote in a way that's going to allow their competition to join in, right? I mean, they're like, no, we don't need competition. We're fine the way we are. So ballot access is a big one. Ranked choice voting, kind of changing the way voting happens so that there isn't such a thing as this, oh, you're a spoiler now, you're splitting the vote. How dare you? I think
Right.
that's a huge issue. Forward Party's aim is to change these things. And the way to change it is either to endorse candidates on either side. So there's candidates that are endorsed by the Forward Party that are libertarian, that are Republican, that are Democrat, that are Green, that are Forward Party candidates, who have that same viewpoint, that they want to bring more ballot access, ranked choice voting to voters, and they're committing to doing that when they get into office. And in some circumstances, the Forward Party will have ballot access as a party and will run candidates on their own that would maybe not get the nomination because they don't get the money from the Republican Party or the Democratic Party, and they get smeared, and so they would then go on the Forward Party ticket. That's why it's technically a political party.
Yeah.
So, but it is not the traditional type of political party.
Yeah.
It's meant to take a sledgehammer to the system and break it up. And then after that, then, maybe once Forward Party completes its mission, maybe then it won't be its own party anymore. And maybe it'll take on a new agenda of what it wants to smash up. And it's just really kind of a disruptor party. And then you would still go and vote for whoever you want in your party that is your primary party of choice, I suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense, and I do see that they are more, by far, not to put it too much of it in a rude way, but they are by far more organized than the People's Party, from what I'm hearing. But the thing that prevents me, I guess, from supporting the Forward Party is that I don't trust Andrew Yang, and I don't agree with a lot of his foreign policy, and I
Right.
also think that once some of these candidates that are endorsed by the Forward Party are put in there, what are we going to do about the legislation? Are they going to write their own legislation that is not written or controlled by the lobbyists? But I mean it, that I don't know if we have time to go into all that here, since
I mean, just
we
to
did say
understand it, is that that's not necessarily in the purview of the Forward Party.
right.
So that's like you take that up with your primary party.
I see.
That is so for me, for example, I would only really want to, my primary party, if I had one, I'm an independent, but if I were to create my own perfect party, there would be no corporate money. It would be just small dollar donations the entire time. There would be, I would have certain policies like being anti-war, things like that I would want in my perfect political party. The Forward Party, being a part of that has nothing to do with my perfect political party or whether or not I want to
Mm,
join any other political party. If I want to go back to Green, or if I want to become a Democrat or a Republican or a Libertarian, it doesn't matter. The Forward Party has a very narrow purview
I
and
see.
a very narrow. And the other thing that Forward Party candidates agree to, no matter where they are, whether they be Green, Libertarian, Republican, or Democrat, or anything else, a Forward Party endorsed candidate agrees to go into office and have good faith attempts to actually make good legislation. So they're not going there to just tweet and get photo ops and go along with the party establishment. They've agreed to not go along with the party establishment if what the party establishment wants is not in line with, a good faith, mainstream, what the majority of people want. And, Andrew Yang has answered when he was on Jim Acosta's show. Jim Acosta was like, well, what do you stand for? What do you think about guns? What do you think about abortion? What do you think about climate? And Andrew's answer kept saying, it's whatever the common consensus is. That's what we're for. We're for common consensus. Jim Acosta didn't like that answer. What Andrew was saying is we're for democracy. So whatever the common consensus is that people want, there are common consensus when it comes to gun laws. There is a common consensus when it comes to abortion rights. There is a common consensus when it comes to climate, and it's not radical. When it comes to abortion rights, The common consensus is a woman should have the right to an abortion up to 15 weeks. That is common consensus on both sides of the aisle. Now, of course, one side of the aisle, there's people that want all the way until the end of there's at any time it could happen. And on the flip side, there's people that never want it to happen. In fact, they want to ban contraceptives, right? But there is an actual common majority consensus that revolves around that 15 weeks, and then after that, you can let the states decide. And more liberal states will have a liberal policy after 15 weeks, and more conservative states will probably stop it at 15 weeks. Well, imagine if our legislators actually went into Congress and rather than demand, like once Roe v. Wade was crushed by the Supreme Court, what did the Democrats do? What did those idiots do? They go in and they're like, no, we're all or nothing. We want
Right.
all or nothing. So they present to codify Roe that they knew that was never going to pass. Why? So why would they harm? That to me was so much more harmful to women to just say we're all or nothing, knowing it was going to fail, rather than at least have a good faith attempt and say 15 weeks. Can we at least agree to that? And then Republicans would say, yes, we can agree to that. And then we would have at least had protections up to 15 weeks in these states that are now banning it completely. I mean, what a bunch of bull, right? For them to just, nope, all or nothing because we have principles. Well, your principles got us nowhere, absolutely nowhere. And there needs to be sometimes, and I know people do not like the word incrementalism, moderate. They think those are dirty words, and they're not always dirty words. And when it comes to things like climate, when it comes to things like gun regulation, when it comes to things like abortion rights, there is a common sense consensus amongst the majority that needs to be heard. And it isn't, because everybody wants to play politics and they want to go on the extremes of both sides, and we never get anything because of it. And so his answer of saying common sense consensus, and that might shift, one day it's this, and then things change and people change their minds, and now that common sense consensus has shifted a little bit. What he's saying is we're for the common sense majority consensus, whatever that is. That's democracy.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Democrats and the Republicans like to keep this infighting alive among their
Totally.
people. It keeps them distracted from the elite that are oppressing them.
It's good
But
for votes, right, to constantly dangle
yeah,
fear.
what else are they going to run on? They can't
Right.
run on real issues. They have to keep that fear of the neighbor alive. And they're like, oh, these radical Republicans want to
Yeah, they
overturn
want to
Roe v.
ban,
Wade and
right, they want to
everything.
ban contraceptives. Like, you're
Yeah.
not going to even be able to get birth control. That's what they want to do. They want to keep that so that you have to vote for them. So they had no desire, they had no incentive to actually go and say, let's do what the common sense consensus is, and at least make at least give women protections up to 15 weeks. After that, it's states decide. That was, to me, just such a wasted, to me, it was so harmful to me that Democrats wouldn't at least come to the table with something that the majority of Republicans agree on. The fact that they wouldn't even present that just because they want to continue that win, or that dangle that carrot in front of us to try to get us to vote for them over and over. That's where we're at. And that is what the Forward Party wants to change, from my understanding. Now, that could, I'm not in charge of the Forward Party. That could
Yeah.
change, that could shift. But at this point, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, and I'll look into it more on the Forward Party pros and cons, and I would love to have a follow up with you on that,
Yeah,
if
for
that's all
sure.
right. So Kim, thank you again for coming on the show. Again, The Hill, they had a serious loss when they didn't include you in that interview. I'm sure it would have been a viral interview because we all need to be challenging authority and hearing the truth. Um, we can't be having echo chambers, and you brought that to the table over at the Hill. So again, thank you
Thank
for
you.
coming on the show. Any other things you want to let the people know? Things you got coming up, where they can find you, etc.
I mean, just my show right now, I'm posting daily, or at least, yeah, Monday through Friday at this point, at KimIversonShow.com, which routes you to my YouTube channel. And, just doing a piece a day at this point, putting it out there, and check it out.
For sure. Take care, everybody. Stay informed.